First of all, happy birthday, Justin Chancellor. This is dedicated to you and to all Tool fans. And now let's talk about your work. So we do have to talk a bit about the mathematics because it is a significant element in the design of this piece. It's a fun idea, this concept of building a piece of music directly out of mathematical elements. And those of us who are attracted to this sort of exercise can easily get lost in the intricacies of it. It's not a new idea either. Composers all through history have been fascinated with numbers, and naturally so, because they are sensitive towards our need for balance, symmetry, variation, development, symbolism, all of which have mathematical elements. I was curious about this piece to see how Tool built the mathematical ideas into their music. You see, music being related to mathematics is nothing new. The idea goes all the way back to at least ancient Greek times. Along the way, certain composers have stood out as being especially aware of and inspired by numbers in their music. Among the classics, these include Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Bartok. So this piece, it is claimed, is rooted in the Fibonacci sequence. Bach was particularly sensitive towards certain numbers in his music. For example, he had a particular liking for the numbers 14 and 41, and they showed up frequently in his compositions. He loved to play with mathematical concepts in his music. Music theorists often comment on his use of the Fibonacci sequence in his work, The Art of the Fugue, which I'll link to in the description. And Bach was not alone in his fascination with numbers. Mozart, Beethoven, Bartok, the list goes on. Even unknown composers sometimes did brilliant things, like whoever it was that composed the violin duet we call tabletop music, which is often attributed to Mozart because of the mathematical brilliance of it, and it came from that era, although most certainly he didn't write it. I'll include a link to that as well so you can check it out. And then, of course, as we get into the 20th century, composers are exploring new ways to think about and create music, and some of it goes way out into the frontier. As an example, there's Ioannis Xenakis, who was not only a composer and music theorist, but also an architect and an engineer. So, talk about a brilliant mind. Anyway, he wrote this weird piece called Metastasis, which explores several mathematical concepts, including the Fibonacci sequence. And here's something fascinating about that particular piece. Later, he used the exact same sketch to design the Phillips Pavilion, meaning he actually designed a building from his music. Look for the link in the description. It might challenge your ears, but it is fascinating to see how different composers handle and relate to and link music and mathematics. All of these composers enjoyed mathematical music games. And here again, in Lateralus, we meet with music that was mathematically inspired by way of the Fibonacci sequence. Probably, if you're very familiar with this band and this song, you know what I'm talking about already. But for the rest of us who maybe aren't so devoted to Tool, or perhaps aren't terribly versed in mathematics, let's take a quick look at what it's about. The Fibonacci sequence is a certain pattern of numbers. Let's say we start with the numbers 0 and 1. Now before we go on counting 2, 3, 4, 5, instead let's pause and add these two numbers together. So we get another 1. 0 plus 1 equals 1. So now our sequence reads 0, 1, 1. Let's use the same method of adding the previous two numbers in order to find the next one in our sequence. So 1 and 1 makes 2, which means we have 0, 1, 1, 2. Now again, let's take the last two numbers we counted and add them together. So we get 3. And our sequence reads 0, 1, 1, 2, 3. And we're going to maintain this habit of adding the final 2 numbers of the sequence in order to get the next one. So next we have 5. And it goes on. 8, 13. Pretty soon, we're taking giant-sized strides across vast numbers. But there's something else, too. Have you ever heard of the golden ratio? It's a special mathematical ratio, roughly 1.618, and then the numbers continue after the decimal point for infinity, that has influenced and inspired artists of all kinds, painters, sculptors, composers, and more. And I won't get into the details of it because I don't mean for this to turn into a math lesson, but I will tell you that the golden ratio is very close to the same formula we use to create the Fibonacci sequence. So it's not surprising to find it referenced in this song as well. Let's look a bit at how these ideas are expressed in this particular piece of music. It's primarily the rhythmic elements that are being built in reference to these mathematical ideas. I would not go so far as to say the song is structured around the Fibonacci sequence, though, because it doesn't follow every part of the mathematical formula exactly. Instead, the composers chose certain representative segments of the Fibonacci sequence, certain numbers drawn from here, from there, and used those as the rhythmic building blocks, while also incorporating other references to the mathematical inspiration at certain key moments of the song. It's pretty obvious they sat down and worked out the details a good bit. And these structural elements play a significant role in the overall musical outcome and how we experience it. Of course, it would be a mistake to make it only about maths, because then we lose the artistic side of it. If we're going to merely coldly apply a formula, well, in my opinion, we may as well let the computer-generated music take over. But in art, we also have the artist's personal judgment, values, inspiration, aesthetic sense, and message. We look to feel the artist's soul. So as with any other music, when I go to experience this song, Lateralus, I'm not looking for a mathematical experience, but a musical one. And that is what I find. It has a fairly memorable opening riff, which, as it continues on, quickly starts to feel rather hypnotic. Beats are grouped in a pattern of 4. It's a rather complex pattern of 4, which, if I'm going to get really fancy, I would say it's compound quadruple time. Anyway, it helps us set up the repetitive qualities. There's a bit of a spiritual, religious vibe, and when the voice enters, it also keeps a cool, detached tone. And the instruments also set a kind of meditation zone mode. There are a couple points in the course of the piece where it builds up to a significant climax, but after each one, the music quickly returns to this hypnotic style, neither highly emotional nor engaging the emotions, not really getting wrapped up in what we could say earthly feelings. As I was first beginning to pay attention to these elements, it quickly reminded me of Eastern spiritual practices. There were places where I began to picture, let's say, a Himalayan Buddhist monastery scene. But at the same time, it feels like a very modern interpretation of these religious ideas. So I wasn't at all surprised when I went to read about the music and band and all, that the lyrics even quote Hermetic texts. In fact, I found a whole essay on the links between Lateralus and Hermeticism. The lyrics also use the Fibonacci sequence, starting at 1. Listen to the syllables in this first line. Black, then, white are, all I see, in my infancy, red and yellow then came to be. Do you see the pattern? 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. The other main riff of the song is also built around one of the numbers in the sequence. Further down the line, 987, 987. That's an enormous number to use in composition musically. The band is thinking in terms of rhythm, but you really can't have any recognizable rhythm pattern of 987 beats. So what to do? We want this number, it's part of the sequence, how do we make use of it? Instead of using 987 beats, they took each digit separately, setting the beats in such a way that we have a group of 9, then a group of 8, then a group of 7. Instead of staying with one consistent pattern of, say, 4, like we felt in the introduction. This gives us a kind of feeling of coming up short, missing a step, unstable. We might not be able to quite figure out what the problem is, but it makes us reach for stability, development, clarity. The first time these beat patterns stack with the lyrics happens in the chorus where it says, overthinking, overanalyzing separates the body from the mind, and so on. It's like they're playing a musical joke with us, giving us something musically to tempt us to get super analytical, and then saying, don't go that way, you'll destroy your intuition, lose all opportunity. But now we get to something even more fun. The intro reprise is set in compound quadruple time again, just like the beginning of the piece. But this time, the drums add another rhythmic element. They are playing a pattern of 5, not 4. We call this polyrhythm when we have more than one kind of rhythmic division pattern going on at the same time. And since the pattern of 5 is progressing concurrently with the pattern of 4, we get a really cool effect. To wrap our heads around it, let's play a game starting with a simpler polyrhythm. Imagine you have a triangle hanging in the air in front of you. Let's trace this imaginary triangle with one hand and snap our fingers at each corner, like this. 1, 2, 3. Back to 1, 2, 3. So our finger snaps are marking the corners of the triangle. Now imagine a square. Trace the square with the other hand, snapping your fingers at each corner. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, and again, we are marking the corners with our finger snaps. We could easily make both hands trace the same shape simultaneously, and it would be pretty straightforward. We could start with a really strong snap on 1, count our way around the 4 corners of a square, and arrive strongly at 1 with both hands at exactly the same moment. But what if we make each hand trace a different shape? Of course, we don't have 2 voices to count the corners around each shape while we go, so we'll simply keep counting up the numbers, and if we do it right, we'll pass exactly 12 corners in each hand, meaning the square hand will travel around the square 3 times, while the triangle hand will travel around the triangle 4 times, before we arrive with both hands at the starting point at the same moment once again. Like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, finally 1. Both have arrived back at the starting point simultaneously. Try it. At first it feels a bit like patting your head while rubbing your stomach, but most people get the hang of it pretty quickly. By the way, If you want to support my journey on this channel and at the same time learn more about music theory and composition techniques, even if you're a total beginner, check out my membership community on Patreon or Ko-fi, where I am presenting a music theory course designed to take absolute beginners all the way to the point where they can write and arrange their own music, understand all music better, and even unlock some of the classical music world. So, going back to Lateralus, when the lyrics reach the end of reaching out to embrace whatever may come, on that word come, everybody in the band starts a pattern of 4, except the drums, which come in with a pattern of 5. But it gets even more interesting than that, because this pattern of 5 takes only half the amount of time to complete as each pattern of 4. So they're playing at a completely different rate from each other. Well, pattern-wise. Think of it like someone taking long strides and walking at exactly 3 miles per hour, while someone else with shorter legs is also walking at exactly 3 miles per hour. They both arrive at the end point at exactly the same moment, but each one steps at a completely different rate along the journey. It just so happens that in this part of the music, the short-legged little drum happens to need 5 repetitions of its pattern in order to catch up or land his foot right at the same moment as the long-legged fellow. And what does this do for us musically? Well, suppose we're watching a parade where everyone is marching exactly in step. We feel a common pulse, a sort of group vibe. And then along comes a little fellow who is stepping at a different rate, and our attention is suddenly split, spread out. We can't quite be irritated with the little fellow for being out of step, because somehow he's still in time with the music. But it fascinates us and pulls us away from the crowd impulse. It becomes energizing in its own way, but at the same time challenges our ability to settle into a groove with everyone else. It's as if our rhythmic sense is less along the lines of a herd instinct response, pointing our attention more outward, seeking, grasping, while simultaneously sending us inward to process the rhythms within our own selves. And this musical moment comes just after we've been through these lyrics. Feed my will to feel this moment, urging me to cross the line, reaching out to embrace the random, reaching out to embrace whatever may come. I think it's great. It's the music answering the request of the lyrics. But it doesn't stop there. This rhythmic setup not only takes us out of that verse, but into the next, which is, I embrace my desire to feel the rhythm. And just as we hear these words, feel the rhythm, we feel the drummer's rhythm change. It still stays in its own pattern world of 5s, but it is a new rhythmic feel within that pattern world. And then the lyrics continue. To feel connected, enough to step aside and weep like a widow, to feel inspired, to fathom the power, to witness the beauty, to bathe in the fountain, to swing on the spiral, to swing on the spiral. And all this time, rhythmically, we're feeling both connected and distanced. It's complex, fascinating, hypnotic, and our senses begin to spiral with the music. But instead of spiraling out of control, everything suddenly comes together, and we hear everything come back into synchronicity, all in a pattern of 4 together, as we swing on the spiral of our divinity and still be a human. All in all, the music does a fine job of illustrating, painting the text, communicating it to us through the rhythmic organization so that we feel it even if we don't know what it is that makes us feel that way. Just imagine trying to access these impressions and inner senses simply by reading the lyrics without any music. It's true, they are quite evocative in their own right, but the music enhances it so much more. So do I like it? In a way, yes, because the braininess of it is interesting. But in another way, I wish for more from it. I wish that perhaps they would have also put the same attention into the melodic and harmonic elements that they put into the rhythm and meter. Or perhaps I would love to have experienced a Fibonacci-based piece of music that would build momentum and surge along in the same way that the number sequence travels at an ever greater rate. Or perhaps something like the spiral manifestation, which creates such a feeling of elegant immediacy. Something that would either draw me in or carry me along with it. How could this be done in music? Well, of course the possibilities are boundless, and maybe someday I will come across such a piece. But in spite of being an idea which began at least as far back as the ancient Greeks, we're still kind of sitting in the experimental stages of translating math into music. And I do enjoy seeing, hearing, and appreciating the various ways that different artists approach the challenge. Even though, as in this case, many of the more modern works make me feel as if I'm supposed to experience it from either a detached place or a cerebral vantage point. Now, many of you are writing me messages and emails with a lot of recommendations. Thank you. I am reading as many as I can. Keep them coming. Your recommendation might make it to the community poll. Speaking of which, there are right now 5 new-to-me artists who have anniversaries or other special dates next month. So if you haven't yet, go there and vote for your favorite band, and remember to drop a comment with your song of choice. Also, if you want to receive notifications when I post new content, click the little bell next to the subscribe button. And if you haven't seen my first listen of Tool Lateralus, click this link. It will take you there, and you will get to enjoy with me my first experience hearing this song. I'll see you soon.